Before you were taught to earn a living, you were born with a soul. But somewhere between your first breath and your retirement plan, you were persuaded to trade wonder for wages and existence for survival. Let me ask you, have you ever truly questioned why you wait to live until your body begins to decay? Why joy must come with a price tag of exhaustion? This is not merely an economic arrangement. It is a psychic deception so widespread, it masquerades as common sense. You call it retirement. I call it the slow death of the unlived life. And today I will not comfort you. I will confront the part of you that still remembers what it means to be alive. What we call retirement is often not the reward of a life well lived, but the final mask worn by a soul that has been quietly deferring itself for decades. From childhood, you were not taught to live, you were conditioned to prepare. Your play was structured, your curiosity redirected, your imagination measured against the yardstick of productivity. The world told you, not yet, not now, later, and you believed it. You believed that joy was a luxury, that rest was permissioned, that aliveness must wait until the body grows weary and the spirit is thin. I have watched many men arrive at this so-called destination. They step across the invisible threshold of retirement expecting liberation, but instead they encounter vertigo. Because what they find is not freedom but silence, and in that silence echoes a terrifying question. What have I truly lived for? Without the tasks, the deadlines, the identity tethered to output, what remains of me? A man I once treated had been a teacher all his life. Revered, structured, respected. He retired with honor, yet within weeks he found himself spiraling into despair. He said to me, I waited 40 years to live, and now I don't know how. You see, he had deferred every spontaneous desire, every creative impulse, every urge to travel, dance, or simply be. He wore discipline like armor, postponing joy for some sacred later. But later is a myth whispered by a culture that fears presence. Cicero once wrote, "To be content with what we possess is the greatest and most secure of riches. Yet contentment cannot be delayed like a transaction. It must be cultivated as a practice now, not as an inheritance of old age. If you have trained your soul to wait, to obey, to endure, do not imagine that it will suddenly remember how to be free. The tragedy is not that we die. It is that we wait to live until death has already begun its slow work within us. There is a peculiar sorrow that grows in the life of the obedient, not the healthy discipline of conscious choice, but the dull ache that forms when one's days are shaped by silent, compliance obedience to expectation, to structure, to the invisible authority of should. From the earliest moment you could walk and speak, you were gently but persistently sculpted to fit into a mold. You were praised when you conformed, corrected when you deviated, and slowly, without resistance, your wildness was exchanged for approval. You followed the blueprint without question. Study, submit, work, save. And now you wait, hoping that all your loyalty to the system will reward you with peace in the end. But the soul does not barter in such terms. It cannot be bribed by pensions or appeased by plaques. It is not moved by the obedience of the outer man, but by the authenticity of the inner one. I once sat with a woman in her 60s who had finally left her job. She told me with a hollow smile, I did everything right, but I feel like a stranger in my own life. She had lived impeccably by the script, but in obeying so well she had forgotten how to feel, how to choose, how to dream. The price of perfection was her own presence. Seneca once said, a man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. This is the nature of the obedient life. It suffers in advance. It postpones joy, fearing it is undeserved. It waits for permission to rest, to create, to dance with life, never realizing that such permission was never anyone else's to give. And so when the final chapter of work is closed and retirement dawns, what remains is not a liberated self but a hollow one that has obeyed so well, it has forgotten how to live from within. There is no greater poison to the soul than the belief that joy must be earned, that it is something distant, conditional, reserved only for those who have suffered enough. This doctrine, so widely praised, is not a virtue, it is anesthesia. Postponed joy is not patience. It is a slow spiritual sedation disguised as discipline, and many live their entire lives drugged by it, whispering to themselves, one day, after the work is done, after the children are grown, after the body has broken, I will finally allow myself to live. But joy, my friend, is not a destination. It is not the grand prize at the end of a race. It is the thread that weaves meaning into every ordinary moment. And when you treat it as a distant luxury, you sever yourself from the essence of life. The soul does not understand delay. It withers in waiting. It does not say, I will rejoice in 20 years. It asks, why not now? I once knew a man, a skilled artisan who worked with wood in his youth. He abandoned it to build a future, swearing to return when he retired. But by the time his calendar was finally empty, his hands were stiff, his vision dimmed, and the hunger he once felt had long grown silent. He sat before his tools like a stranger, unable to remember why he once loved them. His joy had not died, it had simply been buried too long under practicality. Aristotle once remarked, happiness depends upon ourselves, but we have handed that power to the future. We have made happiness a transaction delayed, taxed, deferred until the joy we once knew becomes a memory rather than a companion. And so when retirement arrives, it does not awaken us. It reveals us. It shows us what has been lost while we waited. The tragedy is not merely that joy was postponed, but that in postponing it, we forgot how to receive it at all. Many mistake work for meaning, believing that the structure of labor alone grants life its purpose. But meaning is not the shadow that follows your occupation. It is not automatically generated by your hours, your salary, or your status.
Meaning is not a byproduct, it is a conscious creation.
To believe otherwise is to risk constructing a life so externally complete yet internally void, that one day when the schedule finally dissolves, you are left only with echoes. In the modern world, man often hides behind his function. He says, I am a teacher, I am an engineer, I am a banker, as though his title were the sum of his being. But remove the title, and the silence that follows is often unbearable. I have witnessed many encounter this silence at retirement. When the role is gone and the applause fades, and suddenly the inner life demands attention. That silence, if unprepared for, is not peace, it is a kind of psychic vertigo. I recall a man who came to me after leaving his firm. He had spent 40 years believing his work was his meaning. But now, with his days empty, he felt like a ghost in his own home. He said, I used to be somebody. Now I'm just here. His tragedy was not that his work ended. It was that he had never discovered who he was apart from it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But what thoughts have you fed it? Have you cultivated reflection, creativity, intimacy? Or have you drowned them in routine and noise, hoping that meaning would somehow emerge from the sheer repetition of duty? Work may offer structure, yes. It may offer dignity and rhythm, but it is only the vessel. The meaning must be poured into it from within. Without that, even the most noble occupation becomes empty, and retirement becomes not a liberation but a collapse. For a life that has never questioned itself cannot suddenly find purpose in stillness. From the very beginning, you were not taught to live, you were taught to survive. You were trained to follow instructions, to earn your place, to brace against the world rather than embrace it. The schooling you received did not feed the soul, it domesticated it. You learned to sit still, to answer correctly, to seek validation through results. And so the wildness within the instinct to explore, to feel deeply, to express fully was slowly tamed in exchange for belonging. Survival was glorified. Structure became sacred. You were told that safety lies in predictability, that success is the reward of obedience, that living comes later. And so you internalized a hidden rule. You must first prove your worth before you're allowed to truly exist. But what use is survival if it costs you your aliveness? The deer in the forest survives by its instinct, but it does not deny its nature. Man, however, often survives by denying his spirit. And when at last he retires, when the pressure of daily performance lifts, he expects to feel free. Yet what he feels instead is unfamiliarity, confusion, even fear, for he has spent his whole life becoming a version of himself that was safe, acceptable, efficient, but not whole. Once, a man who had built a respected life in the military came to see me. What haunted him was not the past, it was the hollow present. Retirement, which he had imagined as a liberation, became instead a kind of death. Not of the body, but of the image he had mistaken for the self. And herein lies the deeper wound. The crisis of retirement is not merely economic, nor even emotional, it is existential. It is the unraveling of identity that was built entirely around function. When a man's worth is defined by what he produces, what becomes of him when he no longer produces? If you are your title, your task, your role, what remains when these dissolve? You see, the danger of retirement is not the absence of routine. It is the confrontation with the self beneath it, a self many have never met. For decades, we are encouraged to build identity upon scaffolds of approval, career achievements, societal roles, and relational obligations. These give structure but not substance. They hold us together externally, but leave the inner foundations untouched. When those outer structures collapse as they do in retirement, many find themselves adrift, not because they have nothing to do, but because they no longer know who is doing the doing. Plato once warned, "An unexamined life is not worth living." But most do not examine, they accumulate. They gather responsibilities, possessions, titles, all in the hope that meaning will emerge from mass. But meaning does not come from what you hold. It arises from who you are when nothing remains to hold on to. I have seen men of great success fall into despair the moment they stepped away from their desks, because they had never developed an identity outside their usefulness. Their inner life had been left in exile for so long that, when it was finally invited to the table, it came forth shy, trembling, and unfamiliar. Retirement does not steal your identity. It simply reveals whether one was ever truly there. And so I leave you not with comfort, but with a mirror. Retirement is not the end, it is the great unveiling. It reveals the self you have postponed, the desires you have silenced, the questions you never dared to ask. The tragedy is not that time passes, but that we spend it in exile from our own soul. You were never meant to wait to live. You were meant to awaken, to participate in your own becoming, not someday, but now. If you have built your life around survival, let this moment mark the beginning of something else. Presence. If you have worn masks of obedience and routine, I ask you to gently remove them, not all at once, but with honest curiosity. Begin to ask not what must I do, but who am I when nothing is demanded of me. The world will not give you permission to live. It prefers you asleep, but your soul is still whispering. Do you hear it? So I ask you, before the years escape and your hands tremble with regret, will you wait to live, or will you begin now even if it terrifies you? Because in the end, the question is not what you retired from, but what you returned to.